Welcome back, everyone. So today I'm making a quick video about two of the most well-known hoods to come out of Boston ever. Before these two took very different paths in the Boston underworld, they were partners in crime. They both came up under the notorious Edward Wimpy Bennett, probably one of the most cunning, treacherous gangsters in Boston history. Salemi and Flemmy would become two of the most influential mobsters in Boston during the second half of the 20th century. Having both hailed from the Roxbury neighborhood of Boston, they fell under Wimpy's umbrella. Edward Wimpy Bennett controlled all of Roxbury and large parts of Boston's South End. Back in the 1940s and 50s, it was still mostly white working class, mixed Irish, Eastern European, Italian, and Jewish. It wasn't until after the 1950s that the neighborhood became predominantly black. Wimpy Bennett was of Irish descent, but had allegiance to no one. He had a close personal relationship with Raymond Patriarca, who he referred to as George. That was Wimpy's code name for Patriarca. It was widely thought that Bennett was Patriarca's spy in Boston. If the Boston guys were trying to do something without Raymond finding out, it was widely speculated that Wimpy would drop a dime on these guys and place a phone call to George. Wimpy was extremely devious and was always playing everyone against themselves. He also had very close working relationships with numerous law enforcement officials. It was these close relationships that eventually would cost Wimpy his life. After Frankie and Stevie took out their boss and assumed control of the Roxbury rackets, Jerry and Julo in the North End came a-knocking. Frankie was completely enamored with the Mafia, and even though he was half Irish, he desperately wanted to be made. Stevie, on the other hand, had reservations. He really didn't want to be part of an organization like the Mafia that controlled your entire life. Frank started spending more and more time around Larry Bayonne, aka Lario Zanino. Flemmy even noticed that Slemmy was copying Bayonne's mannerisms and the way he talked. Peter Lamone, a rising star in the Boston Mafia, before Barboza put him away with his perjured testimony, was courting both these guys. He told them, quote, "Usually to become made, you gotta do a hit with one of us there to witness it. But with your guys' reputation, we can pass on that." He was definitely trying to gas these guys up. But also after the Irish gang war of the 1960s, Flemmy and Salemi came out of the chaos and proved themselves to be more than capable killers. So when the New England Mafia decided that it was time to make a move against Joe Barboza's lawyer in order to send a message, it seemed like a good choice to reach out to Cadillac Frank and Steve the Rifleman. It was decided by Raymond and Jerry Angiulo that John Fitzgerald was abusing the lawyer-client privileges and crossing the line between a legitimate citizen and the underworld. Fitzgerald was visiting Barboza on the regular while Barboza was being held in jail. He was passing messages back and forth between Barboza and his crew members. This wasn't an ordinary task for a lawyer, and it was helping Barboza's cause too much. Fitzgerald was also shacking up with Dorothy Barchard, Spike O'Toole's baby mama and a mob groupie. The lawyer was driving around in Barboza's souped-up gold Oldsmobile that was dubbed the James Bond Mobile. Raymond Patriarca had ruled that Fitzgerald had crossed the line and thus wasn't protected like most citizens. The Mafia usually didn't hurt non-criminal citizens, but Fitzgerald, who had straddled the line for many years, had now violated the unwritten law. Raymond gave the order. Jerry Angiulo in turn put Larry Bayonne on the task. Frank Salemi, eager to impress Bayonne, jumped onto the assignment. Phil Wagenheim, a Jewish hitman for the Mafia and close friend of Larry Bayonne, became part of the hit squad as well. Steve Flemmy stated that he never wanted to be part of the mission, but joined because he felt like he had no other choice. Originally, the plan was to shoot Fitzgerald on the way out of his Everett home. One morning, Earl Smith and Frank Bolero were about to perform the mission, but Phil Wagenheim was late bringing the weapons and they missed their opportunity. After the botched shooting, Raymond decided that he wanted the murder to be a loud statement. He wanted to dissuade others from ratting on the Mafia and other lawyers from working with Barboza. Raymond decided that they should plant a bomb in the James Bond Mobile. He wanted a large, extravagant explosion that would get everyone's attention. In hindsight, this was a pretty stupid idea. A discreet shooting would have done much better. Raymond's word was law, though, and Fitzgerald's fate was unfortunately sealed. Once Frank got word that the assassination was to be carried out in the form of a car bombing, he got right to work on planning and practicing. He acquired an Oldsmobile very similar to Barboza's that the lawyer would be driving. At his close friend George Kaufman's inner-city garage, Salemi practiced rigging different explosive devices to the car. Salemi conducted about 8 to 10 experiments wiring the blasting caps at Kaufman's garage, even performing experiments outside in the open. Kaufman's friend Robert Bobby Dadiaco witnessed Salemi working on wiring the blasting caps and would later testify against him in court. After performing an adequate amount of tests, the group decided that it was time to plant the bomb. They decided to plant the bomb while Fitzgerald's car was parked outside his Everett law office. So on the morning of January 30th, 1968, Larry Bayonne and Frank Salemi, dressed in workman's overalls, got to work planting the bomb while Steve Flemmi stayed at the wheel of the getaway car. There was a real fear that they would set off a car alarm and not get a chance to even place the bomb in the car. But that was not the case. They planted the bomb in the car without a hitch, and then they drove to a Greek social club in Boston's South End where their friend Peter Poulos was a member. There they hid the overalls in a stash spot where someone later discarded them permanently. They were with a group of men at the social club when the news of Fitzgerald's car bombing came over the radio. The lawyer survived the blast with major injuries, including the loss of a leg. Bayonne was originally livid that the lawyer survived the blast, but relaxed when Raymond sent word and said he was very happy with the results. Even though the bomb didn't kill the lawyer, Raymond thought that they got the message across. This relaxed Bayonne some. In the hospital, Fitzgerald asked for Agent Paul Rico by name. Flemmi claims he didn't tell Rico that Patriarca ordered the bombing, but he felt like Rico somehow just knew. One morning, shortly after Fitzgerald's failed assassination attempt, Flemmi's phone rang. The man on the line didn't identify himself, but Flemmi recognized the voice as H. Paul Rico. He said that the indictment from Willie Bennett's murder, Wimpy's brother, was coming, and the heat from Fitzgerald's bombing, Flemmi and Frankie needed to leave town for a while. Flemmi called Salemi and told him what was going on, and they agreed to meet in Denham in an hour. Flemmi contacted John Motorano and left him his car keys. Then he met Frank, where he arrived with Phil Wagenheim and Peter Poulos. Frankie was nervous about Poulos caving under pressure, and he knew all about the murders of the Bennett brothers. And I guess Phil Wagenheim just wanted to go for a road trip. The quartet set out from Denham and drove to Peoria, Illinois, where Frankie jumped on a plane and flew to New York City, and the other three flew to Los Angeles. They originally stayed at the house of one of Wagenheim's friends before Flemmi and Poulos got their own apartments in Los Angeles for several weeks, and Wagenheim went back to Boston. Poulos started acting really sketchy in Los Angeles, avoiding Flemmi and skipping meetings between the two. Flemmi soon became worried about Poulos just like Frankie was, so he sent word back east, and Phil Wagenheim appeared back in LA with a .38 snub-nosed revolver. Poulos didn't know Wagenheim was back, so Flemmi made up a story that the two had to go meet him in Las Vegas. Flemmi almost couldn't get Poulos in the car, he was so nervous. They drove to Vegas, and then about 25 miles before the city, Flemmi pulled off onto a back road, and Poulos got visibly nervous. Then Flemmi pulled over and told Poulos that he was too tired to drive any further. As Poulos was walking around the car, Flemmi shot him twice in the chest, and then he got out and shot him twice more in the head just for good measure. He couldn't believe how hard the ground was in the desert, so he ended up just covering his body with shrubs, not being able to dig a grave. He threw the gun away 20 miles after the murder scene, and then he drove 6 straight days back to meet Salemi in New York City. Peter Poulos was later identified from his dental records, and this gave Steve Flemmi his obsession with removing people's teeth that would plague him during his criminal career. Frank Salemi was living in an upscale apartment on Park Ave in Midtown Manhattan. The apartment had previously belonged to a Rhode Island mobster named Billy Candlemos. Louis Babyshanks Minocco stayed with Frankie for a while in New York. He told Frankie that Flemmi was no good and to stay away from him. Later, John Connolly warned Flemmi that Minocco was an informant and to avoid him. Flemmi contacted Paul Rico very soon after going on the lam, and Rico told him that it was going to take some time to sort this stuff out. Flemmi would call the Boston FBI office about once a year to check his status. He would usually leave a message for Rico under the code name Jack from South Boston. After staying with Frankie for a couple of weeks, Flemmi got his own apartment in New York City, across from the Improv Comedy Club on 46th Street and 9th Ave. Frankie worked in a watch repair shop while he lived in New York City. His brother Jackie Salemi would come to New York City once a month with payoffs from Boston. Stevie was receiving $800 a month from his Roxbury's number racket that Jerry Angiulo now ran in his stead, using gang war survivor Earl Smith and his brother Danny Angiulo to run the Roxbury rackets. Flemmi noted that Jackie Salemi was running his Roxbury Shylock business but was not giving any of the proceeds from it. After a month or so, Flemmi became sick of Salemi. He didn't like the way that Frankie would talk down to him and condescend to him. He complained to Jerry Angiulo about Frankie's behavior and told him that he was acting too flashy for somebody on the run. After traveling to Florida with one of his Boston girlfriends, Flemmi ended up relocating to Montreal. Before he left, though, he met his common-law wife Maureen Hussey and their kids on Montauk in Long Island. Flemmi was pissed. While he was on the lam, no one was helping out his family, and Hussey had to go on welfare. This wasn't supposed to be how it was when you were on the lam. Let me correct myself, it was Marion Hussey, not Maureen Hussey. I don't know why I said that. So Flemmy settled in the Mount Royal section of Montreal and blended in with the large Italian population there. Flemmy lived under the alias of Robert Lambruno and even had a valid driver's license in Canada. Flemmy attended a photography school in Canada and eventually got a job working for the Montreal Gazette. Using his education at the photography school, he worked the night shift operating a color offset printing machine for the newspaper. Flemmy liked the job a lot and he said it paid well, between $300 and $400 a week. While Flemmy was in Montreal on December 14, 1972, Frank Salemi was apprehended in New York City. Flemmy claims he had nothing to do with Salemi's arrest. A young FBI agent named John Connolly, just by blind luck, bumped into Salemi and arrested him. This made the young agent a hero and punched his ticket home to Boston, which was where he wanted to be. In fact, someone really fed Connolly Salemi's whereabouts. It was most likely H. Paul Rico. Cadillac Frank was shipped back to Boston, where he ate the bombing charge against Fitzgerald. Robert Bobby Dadiaco, who saw Salemi working on the bomb at Kaufman's garage, testified against him, but not Flemmy. It was said that Howie Winter and John Moderano leaned on Dadiaco not to testify on Flemmy's behalf. But Flemmy noted that they would need help from the FBI to get Dadiaco's whereabouts. Either way, Flemmy was clear of the Fitzgerald bombing. Now all he had to worry about was the William Bennett murder. But Flemmy really didn't care. He liked his new life in Montreal, and he really had no interest in coming back from Boston. That was until Rico got in touch with him one day in May of 1974 and told him it was time to come home. When Flemmy was hesitant, Rico made a veiled threat that if he didn't come home now, he might not be able to help him get out from underneath the William Bennett case. Rico was stationed out in Miami now, so they made arrangements for Flemmy to surrender himself to Boston police detective Tom Mitchell, who was friendly with Howie Winter and Moderano. Flemmy contacted lawyer Bob Dinsmore and surrendered to Mitchell at Park Square in Boston. After spending 4 days in jail, Flemmy bailed out, and just like Rico said, the indictment crumbled. Steve Flemmy was now 100% with the Winter Hill Gang. He would become the sixth full partner of the crew. Winter Hill absorbed random orphans of the Irish gang war like Flemmy. The outcome from the John Fitzgerald bombing would shape the Boston underworld for the second part of the 20th century because it changed the paths of two of Boston underworld's most important players. Cadillac Frank Salemi would go on to serve over 20 years in prison and become 100% Cosa Nostra, sparking the 1990s Mafia war for control of the Patriarca family after his release from prison in 1989. While Steve Flemmy would become part of the Winter Hill, thus becoming close friends with Whitey Bulger, and they would form their unholy alliance with the FBI in Boston, creating countless tales of their own. But this is the story about how these two men, Steve the Rifleman Flemmy and Cadillac Frank Salemi, would go on such different paths after starting in the same place in Roxbury under the wing of Edward Wimpy Bennett. If you liked this video, hit the like button. Subscribe if you're not already. Leave a comment, make a request, but you guys know most importantly, make good choices, take good care of yourselves, and have a great day. Until next time, guys.